Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo. Joined tonight by my co-host, Matt Filipovitz. Matt, what's going on?
Bill, I had a pepper plant out on my balcony that I was really attached to, and I came home from the lake yesterday, and I think a squirrel knocked it over. And I was legitimately upset. It was the first time I've probably been mad in quite a while. And I am now just trying to salvage what is remaining of it. Outside of that, though, I'm great.
What kind of pepper, if I may ask?
Uh, I'm doing sweet banana. It was my sweet banana pepper plant,
Okay.
and I'll send you guys a picture later. One of the peppers right now is like the size of two of my pinky fingers. Like it's huge. Like it's doing really well, and I'm devastated. I also have lettuce, basil, and hot banana peppers that I'm growing as well.
And joining Matt and I is Matt DeBear. Matt, how is your gardening going?
I have done zero gardening. As we talked about last time, I am in the throes of new parenthood, and for our listeners at home, Bill and Matt just virtually met my daughter before we hit record. We had a little, 2 or 3 minute um, meet and greet with Abby, and so I'm doing great. I feel very refreshed. I think I've settled into the fact that I'm only going to get like 5 hours of sleep a night for the rest of my life.
It'll change a good 19 or so years from now, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Before we start the pod, I do want to apologize if I sound a little bit funky. I am moving, and I'm also very stupid, as a lot of you know. So I actually packed my mic, and I'm just doing this a bit of a different way. But what we're doing today is we're doing the part two of a podcast that we did last week where we were going through the 10 most important defining games of James Franklin's time at Penn State, heading into his 10th year here in Happy Valley. We thought it would be good and fun. Last pod was mostly good and fun. This one won't be. To look back on the games that, for one reason or another, shaped the James Franklin era and got us to where we are right now. Last time, the first 5 games that we did, and this is in chronological order, not a ranking order or anything like that. Penn State's Pinstripe Bowl win over Boston College, Penn State's win over Minnesota in 2016, Penn State, Ohio State in 2016, Penn State winning the Big Ten championship game in 2016, and Penn State beating Iowa in 2017. And we left off there. This episode is, again, not going to be as fun. And we're going to start, and since we're double matting it, we'll go Matt DeBear, you go first up here, where we start with number 6. And for me, while we were planning out this podcast, this was the one where I put multiple games together, and I put 4 games here. You all know what these games are going to be just by how I am introducing this. Ohio State, Penn State, a 39-38 loss in 2017. Penn State, Michigan State, a 27-24 loss in 2017. Ohio State, Penn State, a 27-26 loss in 2018. Penn State, Michigan State, a 21-17 loss in 2018. And I put these together, Matt, because I would argue these 4 games combined into kind of one big clump of garbage for us Penn State fans to shape the negative narratives, I would say, largely the negative narratives, I would say, around the Penn State football program right now. What, as you're sitting here in 2023 and you look back on those 4 games, what do you remember? What sticks out? And do you agree with the significance of these in kind of shaping the James Franklin era into what it is today?
Well, I think from a big picture standpoint, you're right that all 4 are kind of, when taken as a whole, are significant. I didn't have either of the Michigan State games on my list.
Nor did I.
Play spoiler a little bit. I have both the Ohio State games on my list though, because I think when I think of defining games, I think of games that shape the overall perception. Yes, the Michigan State losses weren't good. I'll get that out of the way right now. But when you think of them in the overall landscape of college football, if you will, upsets happen. And that 2017 game in East Lansing was just bizarre. I was there for the first 10 minutes or whatever it was before it got suspended for the storm. And that's just kind of a bizarre game. That the 2018 Michigan State game was just bad football. It was a poorly played game on Penn State's part that they still had ample opportunities to win. But when I look at games that define the James Franklin era, it's those 2 Ohio State losses, by 2 points in 2017, by the single point in 2018, that if just one of those games goes the other direction, let alone both, then just think about what the perception is of Penn State as a whole coming out of those years. Now here we are 5 years down the road, and how much impact does a 2018 win against Ohio State really have at this point? Debatable, especially when you consider the kick to the backside that Penn State got in 2020 with COVID and coming out of it in 21. But as far as what I remember, the 2017 game was just it was there for the taking, right? It was an 11-point lead with 5 minutes left or whatever it was. Penn State's probably a couple first downs away from winning that game. Maybe even just one, if you think of it that way. And they just couldn't get, the 3 yards, the 5 yards, whatever it was. But I also think, too, it magnified for as much improvement, as much talent as Franklin and the coaching staff had brought into the program at that point. They lost Ryan Bates. They lost Ryan Buchholz, both in the first half, I believe.
Buchholz was like 4 minutes into the game. I didn't realize how early Buchholz went out of that game.
Mm-hmm. And I think as much as the talent level in the program had improved to that point, the depth, as we saw that, in that game, was just razor thin. And against a team like Ohio State that just throws elite player after elite player at you, that gets magnified. But as we've talked about ad nauseum, that 2017 at this point is probably James Franklin's most talented team. And it's it has really nothing to show for it. It has the Fiesta Bowl win, which is great. But at the end of the day, it didn't win a championship, didn't even play for a championship. So I think that's what sticks with me with the 2017 Ohio State game. And maybe if they win that, they go up to East Lansing the next week and they ride the momentum and they win that game. Instead, they lose the game. And
they definitely do. I think they definitely. That's when losses were spiraling. Yeah,
into that next week. 2018 team just was flawed in a lot of ways. They lost so many of the big players from the previous year. They still had Trace. Trace got banged up early in the year and was not the player that he had been the previous 2 years for long stretches that year.
If memory serves, he got banged up in that game.
I believe you're right. Yeah, I don't remember the specifics, but that game was relatively early on in the year. But I think too, it's like we talked about in part one of this when we talked about the 2016 Ohio State game. Especially back then, it was Ohio State than everybody else in the Big Ten for the most part. Michigan wasn't what they are now. Michigan State was starting to fall back. There wasn't really anyone else that was in that elite of the elite category like Ohio State was. So wins against that program are so defining, and both those games are right there. The 2018 game, I think to some degree it gets a little mischaracterized. Yeah, they were up by 13 points. They were up by 13 points for like a minute and a half. They scored to go up 27-14. I think that's the right score. Whatever it was, they scored to go up to score the touchdown to go up 2 scores. And Ohio State, dinks and dunks, about 3 screen passes with about 1 million missed tackles, and the game. It's a 1-score game again. So yes, they had the 2-score lead. That's really where that game swung for me. Is that ensuing possession? The crowds didn't know it. They're going nuts. You can taste it. And then in the span of really not unlike last year against Ohio State, it just unraveled so quickly. And then they never were able to really do a whole lot more offensively with it at that point. And then the Michigan State game, like I said, which was, I don't remember if that was the following week or not, but it was just a weird game. They dropped so many interceptions. It just was, it was one of those games that, a loss lingered for another week. So that's where I guess the Ohio State games, I think, also play a part in being on my list versus the Michigan State games not being on there, is I think those were so defining in the era as a whole, but also in those seasons specifically where it was right there to have that signature win, if you will, to have that big moment, and it didn't, and then it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, and what my argument is basically, you think of when you think of a lot of the negative talking points around Penn State football, they can't win the big one. They can't get over the hump. They shoot themselves in the foot when they have the opportunity to win a football game. They really are not good after buys. They're not good after buys for whatever reason. The 2017 Michigan State game wasn't like this. The 2018 Michigan State game was. They carry losses one into the next one, and that leads to things spiraling a little bit. I mean, you look at 2018, after they lost to Michigan State, they had a far too close for a comfort game against Indiana. They had a game against Iowa that they just gutted out in the immediate weeks after that. So, Matt, we go to you here. Just do you agree with Matt that Michigan State shouldn't kind of be involved in this and it should just be focused on the Ohio State games, or do you think kind of the breadth of what these 4 losses have gone on to mean for the program is just that significant?
I get what you're saying. Like, I get why you lump them together because, like, very clearly the Ohio State losses were the heartbreakers, the ones we're going to think about, until 3 a.m. the day after. And the Michigan State ones were like, really, like that one, that's the one you're going to follow this up with. I get why you put it there, but for my money, the 2017 Ohio State game is the most important game of the Franklin era. Like, that's when the narrative changed. Like, you guys remember the magical season of 2016, how no matter what they were down, it always felt like they were going to come back. Like, this was the first year that you guys had the blog up and running. I was still a student. I wasn't with you guys yet, but I can only imagine that the game day Slack was always like, yeah, like, I think we're still in this in the fourth quarter if we're down a score. Now I feel like since that Ohio State game, if Penn State is up a score in the fourth quarter against like an Ohio State, we're all kind of like, oh my God, how are we going to lose this? Like, at least that's kind of where I ended up against Ohio State in 2022. So I think the 17 game is just the moment where the narrative switched from, wow, Franklin's this guy at Vanderbilt who won 9 games and got them ranked. Wow, he built Penn State into this Big Ten champion in 3 years with the sanctions. To now it's like, James Franklin going to choke away the big one in the fourth quarter again, or James Franklin has the lead in the fourth quarter again. What's going to happen? Like, that narrative that, rightfully so or not, perception is reality in college football. That's what that comes from. And that's why that 17 Ohio State game is so, so crucial for me. Like, I truly think that, just going back to it, like, I watched the highlights a couple weeks back, like Saquon opening kick, Koa Farmer fumble recovery puts Penn State in business. Like, it's 3rd and goal, a fade to Deshaun Hamilton works. Like, I hate the red zone fade and it worked. Like, everything went well. And then it imploded in such spectacular fashion. Like, that was the only way Penn State could lose that game and it still be brought up as often as it is 6 years later. Is the only way that it happened. Is the only way it could still be talked about like that. So, for my money, that 17 game, is by far the most important game. The 18 game, that was a worse team. But, like, that goes back to my point that you can beat Ohio State with lesser talent because Penn State definitely should have won that game in 18 as well. But I think those 2 Ohio State games are going to be ones that we remember, as the most important losses of the Franklin era.
Trace had 461 yards of total offense in the 2018 year. Just God damn it.
Also, granted, 93 of that came on one pass to KJ.
Yeah. Well, sure. I that's ultimately what I end up thinking back on with those games, probably more than anything. I think back to, like, if you told me after he returned that opening kick that someone other than Saquon Barkley was going to win the Heisman, I would have thought you were crazy. I think of
didn't even get invited to the ceremony.
Yeah, I'm not going to swear on this pod. I hope not. You think of Trace and just the whale of a game that he had. I vividly remember after the 2017 game, like, I watched that on a couch in Elmira, New York, and I was just, like, exhausted. Like, just how it's a real reminder of how emotionally draining this stuff can be, and how much this stuff can can really stink. But then you get the other side of it, which is where I have game number 7. And Matt, we'll start with you on this one. And December 30th, Fiesta Bowl, Penn State 35, Washington 28. I think that you have to include the first New Year's Six win that Penn State had that Penn State has had in the James Franklin era. And the thing that I remember from this game, as someone who was there, was Washington just could not lay a goal. Like, it ended 35-28 Penn State. At no point did I actually feel like Washington had anything any chance of this game. So what do you remember about the Fiesta Bowl? Where do you watch it? Do you agree how important it was in the James Franklin era? And just any other thoughts on this game getting included here?
It was Washington was coming off of a playoff berth. So it was like cool to see Penn State, kind of beat a playoff team. Like, it was the same quarterback. It was a great coach in Chris Peterson. It was cool from that perspective. I don't know if this is a bad take. If it's a bad take, you'll tell me, and I appreciate that. This felt like a consolation prize game. Like, I said that I think 17 was a horrible season because it was James Franklin's best team, and it just got them, the 10 wins, which we've seen him do, 1,000 times, it feels like at this point. I think it was really important for Saquon to play in that game and to go out, on a high note like that. But I just remember thinking, like, man, what could have been? Like, they were so close to running the table. And, listen, if a New Year's Six is a consolation prize, that is a phenomenal program. That's a great place to be. But I just remember this game. You're right, Bill, never felt close. Brandon Smith ended up recovering a really weird, like, backwards pass they tried to do with, like, 8 seconds left. It was absolutely insane how that game ended. But I just remember it was a game where, I felt like Penn State proved that they were in Tier 1B in college football. And I feel like that season they could have proved they belonged in Tier 1A. But at the same time, it was a triumph to get that New Year's Six win in year 4 under Franklin. And it's really cool now that, looking back all these years later, they're halfway to winning all of the New Year's Six. Like, Fiesta, Sugar, Peach Sugar, Peach, and Orange Bowl are the only ones that are left. And I really hope that they're able to complete it because that'll be a major accomplishment for James Franklin. But just looking back on it, I just can't help but feel like that season could have ended in such more spectacular fashion.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but Matt, what do you think about this? When you were watching this game, watching Penn State win a New Year's Six Bowl for the first time in, I don't even remember how. Was maybe the Orange Bowl? Like, you'll know better than me. Like,
that was the first. That was before the New Year's Six was the New Year's Six, but it was the first major bowl win since they beat Florida State after the 2005 season.
Yeah, so like, do you kind of share that same belief as Matt that this is just because, like, there's certainly a hair of truth in it, but I think I just hope I never get to a point in my college football fandom where I like have a nasty taste in my mouth after a New Year's Six Bowl. You know what I mean?
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that, Bill. I think in any other year, outside of like what I view as a window year, I would have been overjoyed. Like, if that was the season that we ended on this year, I would have been overjoyed. But it's like, it's the fact that they could have easily, won the 2 games they lost that makes me feel that way. Like, any other year in the Franklin era but 17, I think that's a phenomenal win and phenomenal season.
And Matt, what do you say?
I don't disagree on the overall premise that Flip has, but I think what it kind of clarifies to me is there's what this 14 playoff has done to what is and isn't a good season in college football, that it's national championship or bust. And I'm old enough, I'm older than both of you by quite a bit with Flip, not nearly as much with you, Bill, but I'm old enough and I've been a fan of college football long enough where winning a major bowl game was a major accomplishment. And I get that the rules of the game have changed because of the playoff and what that does to expectations. But I mean, look at Washington. The year before that game, they were in the playoff. The next year, they were in the New Year's Six game. They disappeared from the national landscape until this past season, really.
Hey, Matt, who was their offensive coordinator the last couple of years?
I'm not allowed to say his name. I think there's some sort of restraining order on what I'm not allowed to say about a certain individual who shall remain nameless.
I love a jet sweep.
Oh, I got to refocus here.
What NFL team was he employed by last year? Do you guys know? It's the funniest. It's the funniest option.
No,
last
Jacksonville
year, no.
was who he got hired.
I know he was with
from.
Jacksonville. Yeah.
Yeah. Where was he last year?
Was he with the Bills?
He was not. It's the funniest quarterback situation you can imagine.
John Butler is the one with the Bills. Funniest quarterback. Was it the Saints or the Bucks?
It was not the Saints or the Bucks.
Okay, who was it?
It was the Green Bay Packers trying to keep Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love happy. Oh, he's currently... Oh, do you guys know where he is right now?
Obviously not. Please continue.
Matt, do you know where he is right now?
I have zero idea.
He is with the Florida Gators as an offensive analyst.
Well, that
sure.
makes
Why
sense
not?
because the Gators employ, like, if you think Nick Saban has a bunch of analysts and his school for recovering head coaches, this was the running joke. I think it was just a year ago, Billy Napier's first year, where they had more support staff in the team photo than players. It was just absurd, the number of analysts and recruiting assistants and everything else they had. So that makes sense that he would end up on that staff of thousands.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt with John Donovan content.
Oh, don't swear in the pod, Matt.
Sorry.
But I think I didn't have this game on my list. It was on one kind of my honorable mentions for the reasons that Bill has it on his, is that it's, and like I was just saying, it's a major bowl win. And I'm of the era where major bowl wins were a big deal. And I think they still are a big deal when, and I like I was saying, the fact that, the sport has evolved to the point where if you're not one of the 4 best teams, your season's a failure. That's not what college football has ever been to me. It's, conference championships, it's beating your rivals, it's winning major bowl games. And this was a big win. And I think, like Bill was saying, this, in my opinion, very inaccurate idea that James Franklin and Penn State can't win the big game. This was a big game. In Washington, it's easy to forget now, but they were, I don't think they won the Pac-12, but they were, a 10-win team. They were a year removed from the playoff with a lot of the same players back, and a lot of guys that went on to play in the NFL. And Penn State, like Bill said, really dominated the game, especially from an offensive standpoint. And I think the other thing that kind of stands out to me from that game is just how good Trace was. Saquon played limited, but he had the big run, which was unbelievable. That happened right. I don't know if he wasn't running right at me, but we were sitting down in like the second or third row, kind of on the sideline, maybe like the 5 or 10 yard line in the end zone where he scored on that long run. So that was cool. And Gesicki had a big game. Deshaun had a big game. That was cool. It was kind of
that's right. Deshaun had a huge game
for those guys. And the other thing that I think, as I talk through this, that kind of comes to mind is late in that game, Penn State did what they hadn't done in Columbus to close that game out. They converted a bunch of third downs. They maintained a lengthy drive. I don't even remember if they scored, but they took a bunch of time off the clock and made it really difficult for Washington to really have much of a chance at the end, even if they did get the ball back, down that one score. So I like I said, it was one of my, half dozen or so games that was on my list initially that I took off, but it's certainly, like, for the reasons Bill said, I think it's worth having in the discussion if it isn't on your final 10.
Yeah, the drive you're talking about, Matt, 13 plays, 47 yards, 6-18. They missed a field goal. Washington got the ball back with 26 seconds left and just didn't really do much of anything. The big thing I remember from this game, because I also attended it, was maybe you'll remember this, Matt, but Saquon has that big touchdown, and he has that arm thing that he does where he puts his arms up and he kind of just circles them around. And some guys on Washington's bench weren't happy with that, and the entire game, I was just like very happy-go-lucky. Like, listen, it's a Fiesta Bowl. I think Penn State's a better team. I'm having a really great time out here. I came down here from Vegas, whatever. And then Washington scores late in the game, and they make it a little close. And guys start doing the Saquon arm thing. And at that point, I wanted Penn State to win that game more than I've ever wanted a football team to win a football game, which they ended up doing. And then after the game, again, Matt, you were there for this, so maybe you saw this, but the entire Penn State team went around the lower bowl and just like high-five fans. And do you also remember Saquon because he had his NFL decision after this. Do you also remember Saquon like looking like he was holding back some waterworks a little bit?
Yeah, I kick myself now in hindsight because we were in like the second row, so it would have been very easy to get right down the railing and get high fives and that whole thing. We kind of didn't leave immediately, but I don't think we necessarily realized what was going on right away and just kind of meandered around. My wife and I, we were not even engaged back then. Gosh, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
We were there we had 2 seats by ourselves, but we were there with a group of like 6 or 8 total people that we tailgated with and, stayed in the same area of Phoenix with and everything. So we kind of worked our way back towards where they were sitting and ended up back at our tailgate and had a couple beers. And the one completely non-football thing that sticks with me was the unbelievable sunset that night against the Mountains, which was really cool. But it was I think especially too when you think about the year before the USC loss and the Rose Bowl, it was fun to have that it's maybe not the cherry on the sundae, but that happy ending to, like I said, that era. Saquon goes to the NFL, Mike Gesicki goes to the NFL, Deshaun Hamilton's off to the NFL. It was that group that really as a core was responsible for pulling Penn State back into national relevancy. It was great to see them get that experience to close it out on that kind of stage, even though it wasn't the stage that we thought halfway through the year and 50 minutes, 55 minutes through the Ohio State game a couple months earlier. That's the another cool thing about those bowl games, I think, is that the opportunity for guys to have that type of send off.
So let's make ourselves a little money before we do the second half of this list, and that's by thanking our pod sponsor, Home Field Apparel. If you're a collegiate sports fan on the internet, you are aware of Home Field Apparel. If you are not, and this podcast is your introduction to Home Field Apparel, they are a premium collegiate apparel brand based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. They are all Indiana fans, and part of the reason I'm doing the Home Field ad right now is because what's coming up after this, hint. Their shirts are comfortable, they are unique, and the designs are cool. If you want to learn more about the school, it's a really good way to learn a little bit more about a school. I take a little bit more of an interest in a school, whether it is your alma mater or a school that you appreciate. I have a Hawaii shirt, I have St. Peter's joggers, just all this stuff in Home Field's arsenal. All of it is great. There is especially a ton of great Penn State gear. They just had a new drop of Penn State gear that includes a quarter zip, that includes joggers, that includes t-shirts, crew necks. If you want it, they probably have it from Penn State. And if you are a new customer for Home Field Apparel and you want to get yourself a little bit of gear, use the promo code ROARLIONSROAR, one word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order. Again, for new customers, use the promo code ROARLIONSROAR, one word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order. Thank you to Home Field Apparel, and also Home Field Apparel. I'm about to get really mad at you because the number 8 game on my list, fast forward to the first game of the 2020 Penn State football season. Penn State travels to Bloomington, weird COVID year, first game of the season, lost in overtime, 36-35. Matt, this says a lot with how weird some of Penn State's losses have been. This is the weirdest loss Penn State has suffered in the James Franklin era.
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I didn't have a single game from the 2020 season on my list. It was just
neither did I, Matt.
Such a bizarre year for college football as a whole, let alone Penn State with Micah Parsons opting out, the Journey Brown health situation, Noah Cain breaking his foot on like the second play of the season. It was one of those, everything that could go wrong went wrong before the season even started, and then it just kind of continued. But that game, like you said, it was a weird game. Even taking the botch call at the end of overtime out of the equation, Penn State goes up. They have a chance to ice the game, and Devin Ford scores. Indiana comes down and ties it, and then tries to squib the kick and hits one of the upbacks to the point where Penn State has a chance to kick a long field goal that just misses to somehow miraculously avoid overtime. I think on the drive that Indiana had that ultimately tied the game, just the unbelievably terrible face mask call on Adisa Isaac that got Indiana out of like 3rd and long, I think it was. He got called for a face mask for grabbing a guy on the shoulder or something like that. It was just it's very much, and I think in a lot of ways, the microcosm of what that 2020 calendar year was like for Penn State as a whole, from a recruiting standpoint, from a assistant coach turnover standpoint, from a on-field perspective. That
basketball standpoint
was a microcosm of everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And even when you thought something great was going to happen, they were somehow going to get out of it, then something bizarre would happen again. And it really did, it set the tone for just a really, really crappy 9 games of football. I will say, without, hopefully this doesn't spoil too much, the one game from this year I did consider putting on my list was the Michigan game.
Makes sense.
It broke the winless streak to start the season. And 2, beating Michigan's always just really fun, and the way they did it was exceptionally fun because it would just kind of beat the crap out of a Harbaugh physical football team that really had no interest in playing that game by the 3rd or 4th quarter. But yeah, I could get really aggravated and fired up if I really got going about that Indiana game just because of how it ended and what led in. Then they have to host Ohio State, who was really the one team in the Big Ten that I think gave a rat's ass about that season by like the 3rd week, and they had to play them. They missing. It was a home game, but obviously no one's there, so 0 home field advantage. And next thing you know, they're 0-2 and they are shell shocked. And I think that was the Maryland game was the following week, and things just snowballed so fast. And it really did start with that Indiana game, but it doesn't really nothing about that 2020 season really defines anything about anything for me. It was just such a weird year. Everyone played by different rules, and Penn State played all 9 games. Ohio State played for a national championship despite only playing 5 regular season games. Like I saw a comment, I think it was Nate Bauer on BWI towards the end of last week, wondering why anyone bothers to count anything from that season at all. I'm kind of there with him on that.
So let me lay out why I have this on here, and then Matt, I'll go to you for a response. Coming into this season, and this is something that kind of gets lost to time, Penn State came into this season even without Micah Parsons, even without Journey Brown. Yeah, I think even by the time that happened, because the poll was released in August, I think both of them might have, I don't remember the exact timeline, but Penn State, regardless, came into the season the number 7 team in college football. This team was viewed as a team that was 1 or 2 breaks away from being a team.
I think that poll came out before the Big Ten canceled the season and reinstituted it. So Mike and Journey were still, as far as we knew at that point, we're in.
Let me correct. By the time this game happened, Penn State was number 8 in the country. So even with those guys out, Penn State only fell 1 spot in the rankings. And yes, I understand all the other stuff about if you probably did it 100% over again, maybe they go what. Regardless, Penn State was number 8 team in the country by the time this game took place. Penn State goes in, whoops up on Indiana. The gap in yardage between Penn State and Indiana was 277 yards, which is more than the total number of yards that Indiana had on the game by 66 yards.
It was wild.
So all this stuff happens in this football game, and Penn State ends up losing a heartbreaker. And the thing waiting for Penn State on the other side of this was an Ohio State team that, if Justin Fields doesn't get hurt in the semifinal against Clemson, I thought that Ohio State team was national championship caliber. They go out there, Penn State, never really puts a glove on them. By this point, they're 0-2. They are in a huge rut. And then things just completely go off the rails to the point that Will Levis replaces Sean Clifford as Penn State's starting quarterback for a game against Nebraska, which Penn State loses, even though just all these disasters happen. And the reason that I have this on here is because I would argue, Matt, so much of the anxiety over the last 3 seasons of Penn State football, the 2020 season, the 2020, I completely agree that in terms of like, does it count? The 2020 season doesn't, like, it's one I'm willing to disregard. But the anxiety that Penn State fans feel in last season in 2022 and in 2021, the year before that, where something went wrong, Penn State was riding high, something went wrong, completely belly up on the entire season. I think so much of that can be traced back to the fact that they lost that game against Indiana, then went out the next week against Ohio State, and then things just completely went off the car went off the side of the cliff, O'Doyle rules style. So what do you think?
This game was one of the worst experiences of my fandom. 2020 was awful. I hated it. I remember they scored the opening drive. Freiermuth broke the tight end touchdown receptions record in his first game, which was awesome. And then everything else is just an absolute blur. Like, this is like, I don't want to count 2020 for anything. Like, I don't know how you count a season where it was clear that, like, the Penn State staff's goal was to make sure everybody was eligible to play. They played 9. Like, they clearly did not practice together as a team to ensure they would have at least someone available to play every week. So, like, the overall quality of football dropped. Like, that was the quantity over quality football season. They got more games, but it was worse because of the way they had to do it. I never want to think about the 2020 season in a positive light in any way, shape, or form. But I will say I am very excited now for the freshmen at this time who are now seniors on this roster to get to come into their senior year now, likely ranked in that 6-7 range once again. Like, it's a very cool full circle moment of how things started for them. And I hope they're able to end it in a much more positive way. But that Indiana game in 2020 was, just nightmare fuel.
Hey, the 2020 season got them Mike Yurcich. Was it really all that bad?
That's true.
It did. After one season of hiring away PJ Fleck's offensive coordinator, and that just didn't work, so they get somebody else, and now that guy is back under PJ Fleck. Just why
he's at Rutgers now.
Oh, that's right. Why do we like the Big Ten? Like, why do we affiliate with the Big Ten? Like, why couldn't we have all gone to like a conference that isn't terrible at everything?
Listen, real quick, I ran the Big Ten 10K this weekend, and shout out to the guy at the Penn State Alumni Association group who said he liked the podcast. Shout out to that guy.
Salute.
I'm so sorry. That was awesome. Yeah, the Big Ten. It's definitely football.
And speaking of definitely football, this moves to the number 9 game on my list. A game kind of like the Indiana game, where Penn State should have won. And I think that the way that you tell the story of the James Franklin era requires the downs of the 2020 and the 2021 season. Mm-hmm. And for the 2021 season, Matt, I decided to go with Penn State 20, Iowa 23, Nittany Lions lose in Kinnick Stadium. And again, I think that a big reason that Penn State ended up losing the following week to Illinois was because they lost this game. And they lost this game because Sean Clifford got hurt, which really did derail a lot of the rest of the season. And PJ Mustipher got hurt, which really derailed the rest of the season. What do you say?
This game is going to be remembered as the game where we, I think, as fans, truly realized the gap between Penn State and the elite of the elite. Like, top level, Penn State can compete with pretty much anybody. It was the depth that kind of proved to be the problem here. This Iowa game, Penn State was clearly the better team. They played a better game. But the quarterback just didn't get it done. Like, hats off Taquan Roberson. Good on him for going out there. That's a tough spot to get thrown into your first game action, but I think this game is now going to be remembered as a game where we saw a philosophical shift from the Penn State staff. Like, look how early Drew Allar got in games last year. Look how much they rotated. Look how many freshmen got in. Like, I think this game is going to be remembered as, yes, a game that Penn State definitely lost, definitely should have won. A very easy one to explain away a loss in that your 2 best players got hurt. But I think it's really going to show that the staff fully understands how much depth means. And if I now fully understand how important depth is. So this game stunk. they were definitely, it's hard because they were definitely the better team, and they definitely beat Illinois. And then that's a 9-3 season. So that's a great season, coming out of the hell that was 2020. So is going to be remembered as another hinge game. But again, I think this is a hinge game that can be explained away much more easily than a lot of the other ones.
And yeah, Matt, I mean, let me ask you this. Did this game appear on your list? And do you agree, even if it didn't appear on there, that this holds a level of significance in the story of James Franklin as Penn State's football coach?
Matt, you're on mute.
We're not cutting this.
No, that's even better. No, this game was on my list.
Nick's editing this week, so I won't even tell him about it.
I sounded great, by the way. I had some of my best thoughts in the history of the podcast for those 5 seconds. No, this game was on my list. I debated between this game and the Minnesota game in 19. As kind of one of those, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Unnecessary losses or something like that. But I think for the reason Bill said, the impact that this had on the rest of the year in a very tangible way because of the injuries to Mustipher and Clifford. Mustipher obviously misses the rest of the year. Clifford was less than 100% really for the remainder of the season. I'm not sure. I'm sure it played a part in what we saw from Penn State in 22 as far as getting freshmen on the field. I think a big part of that 22 mindset was they had some really, really, really good freshmen, and they deserved to be on the field. They're best players. But I think where it defines the Franklin era for me is maybe it's a symbolic. It's the one game of those Michigan State games, the Minnesota game, those games where they were the more talented team and didn't get it done. It's the one game from that batch, I guess I went with because of the impact it had, and really the massive snowball the rest of the year where they only beat Maryland and Rutgers to after that game, I think, right?
Yeah.
Before the embarrassing loss to Illinois, which is still one of the funnier games I've ever watched, just for the record.
If anyone other than Penn State was in that game, I would talk about it twice a week.
And this is coming from a guy who attended the 6-4 game, by the way. And that game has the level of hilarity. But it was for so many reasons. I think that 2021 team wasn't as good as their ranking indicated going into that game. And I think we saw that. I think eventually, whether it was that week or in a following week, they were going to be exposed to some degree. But I think too, not to go off topic too much, I think you saw that team still almost beat a Michigan team that won the Big Ten and went to the playoff.
They lost their.
Did they win? I don't remember. That's so
they did. Ago. They lost their 5 regular season games by a combined 21 points.
Yeah, and they won some close games too.
Right. The Wisconsin game, the Auburn game, yes.
It was that team was probably better than their record by a couple games, but that season, I think, as bad as the record was, and you are what your record says you are, I think you saw some signs of some pieces that were going to be integral in the following year and going forward, and you knew. If you're a big enough fan and you follow recruiting, you knew what was coming too. So you can kind of see the emergence from that slog of 2020. There were some signs there as you went through that year, as painful as it was. And as much as I think we all hated watching that team by the end of the season, it was such a transitional year, but that Iowa game just, for me, like I said, just kind of exemplifies a lot of those, woulda, coulda, shoulda games where Penn State was the better team and didn't get it done, which is part of college football. I don't think that's outside of the half dozen elite of the elite teams, which Penn State just isn't one of those teams and hasn't been one of those teams. And I'd maybe even argue that, even if they win the 2017 Ohio State game or the 18 Ohio State game, they're probably still not one of those teams. They just don't have and haven't had the depth of talent consistently to perform at that level year after year. But anyway, it it started to pull them out of that slog and get them back into that tier where they are now, and where I think pre-COVID we thought they were, and they've kind of got themselves back on that footing.
Yeah, an interesting question we'll never get a straight answer to is I wonder if the 2022 season can happen if they don't kind of go through like the trials and tribulations that they went through in the 2021 season, and just like seeing all these close ones slip through their fingers and use it as an opportunity to grow to become a better football, especially because week one, it took some Sean Clifford devil magic to get out of West Lafayette with the win. Well, before we end this little walk down memory lane with the positive one, we're going to do a quick veer off the side of the road. Well, Matt, we'll start with you since you were the one who most recently spoke here. Iowa 2021, was that the angriest you have ever been after a loss in the James Franklin
era? Angry at who?
God.
That's
I think so. And the Indiana game the year before, I was mad at a very specific individual who decided that was a touchdown. I wasn't really mad after the 17 Ohio State game, because it was the JT Barrett experience in the fourth quarter. I was hungover after the 2018 Ohio State game. The Michigan State losses, I remember distinctly the 2018 loss, being really, really pissed off for like 30 minutes, and then I kind of got over it. That Iowa loss just lingered for days because of the fan reaction, the Kirk Ferentz, smelled a rat quote, the worshiping that was going
Stomp
on
them this year. Stomp Kirk Ferentz out of Iowa City this year, please.
The national media. I remember Stuart Mandel, Nicole Auerbach. I don't think Feldman was in on this, but after Ferentz's smelled like a rat comment, there was a lot of, look at him go, look at him, look at him call it how he sees it. And a lot of forgetting that, at that point he was being sued by former players for racism. He had sent, a dozen players or whatever it was to the hospital several years earlier. A lot of forgetting that Kirk Ferentz, if he was at any other school, probably isn't coaching anymore.
Yeah.
At that school. And the social media reaction, it was just, it lingered so long for so many reasons that you just kind of kept playing it over and over again. You just kept thinking, man, if Sean Clifford gets hit, 6 inches to the left or right of where he got hit, he probably doesn't crack a rib and probably stays in that game, and they probably win. And we're not having any of these discussions. It was just it was allowed to linger in your mind for so long because you just couldn't get away from it anywhere you looked for basically the whole week, it felt like.
Yeah. Matt, same question to you. Was this the angriest that you've been after a loss?
No. Ohio State last year was the angriest I've ever been after a loss.
Okay. At the time, was it the angriest that you had ever been after a loss?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, for sure. Thinking about like they were like what, number 4 in the country? Like they were crazy highly ranked.
Oh, 4, yeah, they were.
Whatever they were. Yeah, at the time, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for me, I was vibrating mad because I had buried deep in my mind until I asked this question of you guys, the whole Kirk Ferentz, I smell a rat, I think Penn State players are faking injuries, I think they're coached to fake injury stuff, and like I'm getting mad again. But like I was trying to go through the list of like, all right, the Maryland game in 2014, the Temple game in 2015, the first Pitt loss, that first time Michigan blew them out, all these sorts of games. And yeah, it's that one. That I, again, not going to swear in this podcast. So let's end with a happy, optimistic game, the final game, the number 10 game. Matt DeBear, you're going to start with this one. Penn State 35, Utah 21. Penn State wins the Rose Bowl. First time that James Franklin gets to lift the Rose Bowl. And Matt, on the heels of what was such a it was a season with some really high highs, a season with some really low lows for Penn State. To be able to end it with a Rose Bowl, like, I hope I never get to a point in my college football fandom, and college football more specifically, as a sport, never gets to a point where it's not going to feel special to watch a team win the Rose Bowl.
No, I think, that might be the biggest reason this game's on my list. It's the Rose Bowl. And like I was saying earlier, I grew up in a time when if you went to the Rose Bowl and won the Rose Bowl, you had a great year. It didn't matter where you finished in the rankings. That meant you won the Big Ten and you won the Rose Bowl. And that's a hell of a year. And for a long, long time, that was, it didn't matter. Nothing else mattered. And the sport has changed, like we were saying earlier. I think from a very practical standpoint, Penn State beat a good team. And just by the nature of the way the schedule fell last season, they played 2 of the 4 best teams. They played one of those teams pretty close at home. They got embarrassed by another one of those teams on the road. But Utah is and was a really good team. They won the Pac-12. They beat a good USC team twice.
Embarrassed USC.
They had some really good wins during the year, and Penn State really dominated that game, especially in the second half. And I think not only did that lead to winning the Rose Bowl, but I think it confirmed what those of us who watched the team all year knew from watching it. They were a good team. Were they a great team, an elite team? No, but they were a really good team. You put them up against anyone other than those 4 teams that made the playoff, and they've got a great chance to beat any of them, in my opinion. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about how this idea that if you're not in the playoff, if you're not playing for a national championship, then your season's a failure. That was last season was as much fun as I've had watching Penn State football probably since the 2016 season. The 2017 season was fun, but it was the weight of the expectations. I think, after every one of those wins, like, okay, we got through that one. Then you were so disappointed when they lost those 2 games. But last year, you were playing with house money. They were the 3rd best team in the Big Ten, and they were maybe the 6th best team in the country. Just to throw a number out there, I'd put them up there with whoever finished 6th if they weren't them. And I think too, for a guy who was as polarizing as he was for his 15 years on campus for Sean Clifford, to see him go out with that kind of performance, to win the MVP, to see the tens of thousands of Penn State fans who were out there give him that standing ovation when he came off the field, that was just really cool. That's from the sentimental part of me that loves that part of college sports, thought that was just a really, really cool moment. And despite the fact it was like 55 degrees and it was raining pretty hard at that point, I was glad I was there to see that in person, because that's just, I think, for a guy that never got as much credit as he deserved for everything he did, not necessarily on the field at all times, but off the field. And the way that not only James Franklin and the coaching staff talked about Sean Clifford, but the way his teammates talked about Sean Clifford, to see him get rewarded on that stage was just a really cool moment.
Yeah, Penn State ended the year 7th in the country last season. When it comes to how the game went, obviously, Utah quarterback Cam Rising getting hurt really, really killed them. Kind of just the way Utah won games was they keep it, they hang with you in the first half, hang with you, and then they just start leaning on you like a great boxer, and they just couldn't do that with Rising out. But regardless, 35-21, Rose Bowl win. Matt, what was it like watching Penn State win a Tier 1B bowl game?
16 Ohio State, 17 Iowa, 2022/2023 Utah. That's the order of best James Franklin wins for me. This was like I feel like I maybe worded my Fiesta Bowl point poorly. Like I don't think
I'll say it. You worded the Fiesta because like the way it came off was every single non-playoff like New Year's Six Bowl is just a consolation prize. It doesn't really matter.
In the window year, yeah. Like I think that's, but again, that's why they see Penn State as a program. Like, isn't this thing that stays the same? My expectations and what I hope changes year to year. Like my point is like the 2022 Rose Bowl win was one of the best wins of the Franklin era. Like that team outperformed what they should have been like crazy. Like I don't think that I'm not devaluing the Fiesta Bowl win. Like it's just the fact that, hey, that team probably should have been better for me. That's what this comes back to. Like this idea that Penn State is this one thing and it should be that same thing year in and year out. Like I don't subscribe to that. They have different expectations based upon the roster they've built. And for them to go out in a Rose Bowl, in the biggest stage of college football, be the only team, I think, in the Big Ten to win a game in 2023 so far this year on this technicality, was awesome. Like, this is a wildly impressive performance. Like, it's not playoff or bust for me every single year. The fact that they won the Rose Bowl and did it in such dominating fashion with these young, exciting players, with these seniors like Sean Clifford and Jair Brown getting this proper send-off, that's what makes college football great. Like, the Rose Bowl was the number 3 win of the Franklin era for me, behind just the Ohio State game, which was magical in 16, and an Iowa game that we all remember very fondly for a lot of reasons back in 17. Like, it's the fact that that team outperformed what they should have been, and to cap it off in the Rose Bowl like that was one of the coolest things ever. Like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm devaluing 17, but what Penn State was in 17 should have been better than what it was in 2022. Like that was kind of the point I was trying to make. So I don't want to make it sound like I think every single bowl win that's not the playoff is not important, but I view Penn State as a window program. I know you both, violently disagree with me, but like it just shifts for me. Like year to year, the expectation shifts, and for them to exceed expectations and win the Rose Bowl in such dominating fashion was a really, really special game.
Was Penn State coming back from being down 28-7 to win the Big Ten not one of the 3 biggest Penn State wins for you?
No, that's a great point. All right, number 4 then for Utah. I was thinking.
Okay, there we go.
All right, sorry. Number 4 then for Utah.
All good.
Good. Thanks for calling me on that. It's a good call.
But Utah's not the regular season either.
I meant like when I was talking about it, I wasn't thinking regular season. Whatever. I wanted to make sure I got my Fiesta Bowl point in there first too.
That's fine. So there's my list. Pinstripe Bowl, Minnesota 2016, Ohio State 2016, Big Ten Championship game, Iowa 2017, Ohio State, Michigan State 2017 and 2018, Fiesta Bowl win, Indiana 2020, Iowa 2021, Rose Bowl 2022. Matt, we will start with you. What games did I miss on my list that made it onto yours? And Matt, once Matt's done giving his, we'll go over to you. And if there's any crossover, we will quickly talk about that game.
Which Matt's going first?
You are going first. We are following the pattern of the person who most recently spoke now gets to go again.
Okay, all right. I heard Matt laughing too. I heard Matt laughing too.
I'm picturing someone at home listening to this going just like thinking that Bill just had a stroke.
Sometimes I think I am when I'm dealing with the two of you. No, we are following the snake draft method of.
Okay, podcast. So it's back to me. Okay.
Yes.
I have 2022 Michigan on here. That's for a season like that. To if you're undefeated, you have those expectations in mid-October, and you get your ass kicked like that. Like that's going to be a game people talk about for a long time. 19 Minnesota, just a tough game all around. A game they probably should have won. But listen, like if Penn State plays that poorly and still keeps it that close against the best Minnesota team in like a century on the road, that's still a pretty good season. Like that was a pretty good team. And then 2, I want to make sure I call out 14 UCF, the first game of the Franklin era. To watch the Sam Ficken redemption arc we had right there was really cool. To win that game in Ireland. And then the first game of my senior year, 2018 App State.
Ugh.
There was so much anxiety around that team because Saquon was gone. Gesicki's gone. Saeed Blacknall would have been gone. Like, was Hamilton gone? Yeah, Deshaun, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yeah, Deshaun Hamilton's gone. There's these whole new cast of characters, and for them to basically blow it and then to come back in phenomenal fashion with this new cast of characters and KJ Hamler, Miles Sanders, Amani Oruwariye took over as starting corner with Haley and Christian Campbell gone. That was a really important game, I think, looking back on it all these years later.
Yeah, I watched the I watched the App State game at a friend's house while his family was trying to throw like a Labor Day party, and it didn't go well. I had Michigan, Minnesota, and App State as honorable mentions. I didn't have UCF on my list. Matt, what about you?
The two games that were on my list that didn't make it on yours were the 2018 Pitt game, because that was just so much fun. And I think
Oh God, that was so
because
fun.
of the Franklin Narduzzi feud, I think to beat him down that way in his house and just embarrass him with the running it up late, I think that really put a nail in the coffin of this, who runs the state kind of narrative that was trying to be forced on there. Then I had the 2022 Auburn game was on there.
Oh, good
I
call.
know that
Yeah.
Auburn team ended up not being much to write home about, but anytime you go on the road, especially early in the year when the story of the season is still being written and you don't really know who's good, who's not, to go in to Jordan Hare and win the way they did, I think is really, really impressive. Especially, by record, that wasn't a big game at the end of the year, but I think at the moment it was. And I think the way Penn State performed in that game, really from start to finish, ought to put a real put a huge asterisk on anyone who thinks that Penn State can't perform in the big game. Did they perform every big game? No, but I think that performance from start to finish was really telling. I had a bunch of others that were just kind of honorable mention. I'm going to fly through them here real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought the San Diego State game in 2015.
You're an absolute sicko.
Well,
That was Saquon. That was
the
Saquon's coming out party
for the Saquon reason. Exactly.
Right.
I think he kind of that was his first big emergence onto the national scene. We talked about the Maryland game in 2016. Again, in hindsight, that wasn't a great team, but to continue the momentum out of that Minnesota game, I thought was really big. The Iowa game that year, again, that was just a lot of fun to beat the crap out of them. The Michigan State game that year, redeeming from the previous year in East Lansing. The Iowa game in 2017, an ugly. We talked about that one. I'm sorry, I'm getting my list confused here. The Maryland game in College Park, the Friday night game, well, again, just was a lot of fun, and all the hype around that game to just blow it up in the course of about 10 minutes to start that game. I thought the Michigan win in 2019 was a big win. Neither team was an elite team or even maybe a great team that year, but they pulled that win off. And then that's probably it from there. There were some good wins in 22, but I'm not trying I'd call any of them defining. But just some of those games I think, are easy to forget, but in the moment felt, if we had this conversation a couple years ago, maybe some of those games are on the list because of what they meant to where the program was at that point.
The 2016 Iowa game, I felt the concrete under my feet in Beaver Stadium bend. Like everyone always talks about, obviously, the Ohio State game and the environment that was. That Iowa game, for my money, that year was the best environment in Beaver Stadium. Like it was just, everyone was out for blood. Everyone knew how at that moment, everyone knew how special that team was. And they just went out and did it. Matt, did you have any honorable mentions on your list?
Mine were the 14 UCF and 18 App State. Yeah, those were my two.
Okay.
And I was going to put 15 Buffalo. That game is a very big, important place in my heart. It was my first game as a student. And coming off of the Temple loss, watching that in a dorm with people I had just met, and then to go out there in a pouring rain, Beaver Stadium, to watch what we all knew was going to be a bad game against a bad Buffalo team, was a game I just remember very fondly. It was my first game as a student. It was coming off of a terrible game, and to still see a good crowd meant a lot to me. So there's that one.
Yeah. So for my list of honorable mentions, consider my list is going to be a little bit bigger because I came up with the exercise. I had to figure out what was getting chopped, what made it in, and not all honorable mentions are created equal. Some of these are really some of these came really close to making it. Others, I was just maybe I'll jot it down. 2014, Ohio State and Maryland. If everyone remembers correctly, that was the game Maryland didn't shake Penn State's hands, went on to beat a Penn State team that had like 43 scholarship players or whatever. 2015, I put Temple. I put the Army game because
How dare you?
Because Penn State should not have won that game, and I think that was the game where James Franklin like realized the expectation is different here than it is at a place like Vanderbilt. And then I put the Tax Slayer Bowl. It ended up being kind of the first time we were like, oh, there's something with this McSorley kid. Pitt in 2016, Michigan in 2016. I put the 2016 Rose Bowl in there as an honorable mention just because that was like the best football game I've seen in my entire life. Michigan in 2017, where third snap of the game, they shift. Saquon takes a direct snap, takes it to that. Like I thought Saquon again was winning the Heisman after that. 2018 App State and Pitt, 2019 Minnesota, 2020 Maryland, 2021 Auburn and Illinois, 2022 Michigan and Ohio State. And I think the purpose of this exercise ended up being Penn State's played a lot of football under James Franklin. Penn State's going to continue playing a lot of football under James Franklin. And right now we are at the point where we're just sitting down waiting until September 2nd to roll around when they get back to playing football against the West Virginia Mountaineers. Any final thoughts on this general exercise on going into 10 years of James Franklin in Happy Valley from either of you?
I think it just proves that remembering some guys, remembering some games will always be an enjoyable summer exercise.
We should do a Remember Some Guys podcast where I will try and figure out what that looks like, but a Remember Some Guys podcast before we start really diving into like position previews and stuff might be fun. Matt, any final thoughts from you?
10 years flies by. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Second longest tenured coach in the Big Ten. And I hope the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, however much longer he's here, I hope are equally as fun. I've had a blast these past 9 years, and I cannot wait to see what this upcoming season has in store.
Here's hoping that Iowa's offense scores about 17 points per game, so James Franklin has a chance of being the longest tenured coach in the Big Ten at the conclusion of this season. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. As always, make sure you're subscribing wherever you go and get your podcast. If you can leave us a review, please go leave us a 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, hop into the comments section, have some fun talking about Penn State over there with us, and give us a subscription over there. Follow us on Twitter over at RLR Blog. And of course, thank you again to our friends over at Home Field Apparel. Again, use the promo code Roar Lions Roar. One word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order if you are a new customer at Home Field Apparel. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of the pod. For Matt DeBear, for Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.
Go State.